Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years in the classroom. And today's topic is going to be a great one. It's going to be the final part of our Inquiry in Classroom series, and we're going to be talking about inquiry in the English classroom. And so I've got a guest speaker in the studio today. I have Dr. Sarah DiCaglio, Assistant Professor and Writing Program Administrator in the Department of English in the College of Arts and Sciences here at Texas A&M University. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I always love being able to invite our faculty in to talk about their experiences in the classroom, even though we don't talk about it much. This is a podcast that's really geared towards our students who are going into the secondary level or at high school. But I think we can do there are a lot of really innovative things happening at Texas A&M that can really be brought into the classroom. So I love the fact that you are here. And let's just get right in with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of where you're coming from and what do you enjoy about teaching?
Sure thing. So my background is right after college, I did an MFA in poetry, right? So I have a background as a poet, a background in, I have my PhD where I study the way that we think about and talk about health in literature and things like that. But my heart is in teaching and has always been. So while I was working on my MFA, I had this great opportunity to take part in a program where I was a writer in the schools. And so I would go in through to third through sixth grade classrooms and get to be the once a week fun guest who got to teach writing and teach poetry and teach all sorts of ways for students to find their voice through language.
That's great.
Then from there, I got my MA in actually secondary education. I was a middle school teacher for several years in the Bronx, New York, which was something that I truly loved and truly enjoyed doing. But then as I found myself getting my MA, they made the mistake of having us take a lot of English graduate courses. And I found myself sitting there being like, oh no, I really like this. Oh no, I think I need to get a PhD. And I found myself moving, and I moved to Penn State to get my PhD. And there I was really fortunate to have a lot of training and opportunities to work with teachers of writing. Mm-hmm. I worked in our graduate writing center, for instance, which writing center pedagogy, as I'll probably get into at some point, is really fundamental to how I think about the process of teaching writing and this kind of inquiry-based approach. I also worked with our writing program. There we're coordinating what are hundreds of sections of writing classes, and think about, well, what are we teaching here? And what does it mean to teach writing in a really meaningful way? So I had that great experience just inherently in my training. And at Texas A&M, I found myself immediately coordinating our multi-section writing courses. Mm-hmm. And part of doing that is being involved in the training of new and continuing instructors and thinking about, well, what is the best opportunity that we can have in order to really work together to think about what does it mean to be teaching in a meaningful way. So I have the great privilege of, I teach our graduate pedagogy class. So I teach first-time teachers of college. I get to talk to people all the time about what they do in their classrooms. And I try to bring a little bit of my experience throughout of teaching in, I think I've taught every grade from kindergarten through 8th. I skipped high school, and then all of college and graduate school. I try to bring that all together. I like middle schoolers. No one,
Oh man, there's a special group and only certain people can do it.
But they're the funniest people you will ever meet.
They can be.
And they need you.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, we definitely need some really, really great middle school teachers. So if you're listening to the podcast and you're thinking, maybe I could do that. We need some really good middle school teachers out there.
Yeah, a great luxury of what I've done here is that I also get to work with a lot of pre-service teachers or people who are taking some of our degree programs in order to become teachers. And I'm a sucker for a middle school teacher.
Well, that's really cool. I mean, a lot of your story, I think, parallels mine a little bit in terms of loving the classroom, but then finding your way into working with teachers and being able to help them teach better. So, I mean, I had a follow-up question about, like, what is you love most about being in the classroom, but it sounds like you also have this working with teachers aspect of it. So, like, what do you love most about working with teachers? What do you love most about teaching in general?
Oh, so many things. The thing about teaching is that it's always surprising. Every day is different. True. Every conversation is different. You find yourself sitting there and you're always kind of problem solving and saying, how do I explain this in a different way? And what do I learn? How do I be changed by the experience of teaching my students, right? And that's part of the whole question of inquiry-based learning really is allowing ourselves to be open to the discovery that our students are making and to make them side by side. And so my favorite thing, I can talk teaching all day, and I love getting to do it with, especially with new teachers, because it's hard out there. There's no one can make being a new teacher easy.
Nope.
You have to go through it. But I get to hear them make discoveries, and I get to use the experience that I have in the classroom and from reading what are thousands and thousands of papers, I can kind of be able to see and say, oh, well, I see this pattern. What if you do this? What happens if we kind of tweak here and we make this little change? And I get to see, I think, teaching and writing and reading, these are these processes that help you discover new things about yourself. And so it's just really a great joy to get to watch people learning and watch people learn really about themselves and what they're capable of and really who they want to be through the experience of teaching and of teaching teachers.
That's fantastic. I was reflecting on, I believe it was Robert Marzano, an educational researcher. He said, teaching is both an art and a science. And I think what you just said exemplifies that to the letter. It's all about the personal relationships we have with students, but it's also about making those tweaks to see if we can make it better as we move into the next class or the next year. And that's great. And there's just so much enjoyment. And what I'm hearing as I'm doing more and more of these, especially in this topic of inquiry, it's that a teacher finds so much joy in what they're doing with the content that they love, that they just love sharing it with others, and they love to see others interacting with that content, which is just fantastic. So you brought it up a couple of times, our topic today of inquiry, right? So if I had to ask, what does inquiry-based learning mean to you, and what does it look like in your own classes, what would you say?
So I think as someone who I identify, you can probably hear it already, mostly as a teacher of writing. It doesn't matter what topic I am teaching, I am fundamentally teaching writing because I think of writing as a form of thinking. And no matter what we're doing, we're moved and changed by by what we put down on the page and what we discover through that process. So that's a big piece of how I understand inquiry-based learning is really understanding that what we're doing, I tell this to my English students all the time, in the humanities, we're making things with our mind. We don't have a lab. The lab is our computer, it's our space, and it feels intangible. But there's a reason why we can all come to the same book and we can come up with different readings, right? We can write something, and the process of writing helps us learn something about not just that text, but about how do we put ideas together? How do we understand things? So that's so much of how I understand inquiry. It's that kind of following out what's on the page, seeing and discovering what we put together through our process of writing, through our process of reading, and then just continuing to move with those questions. So not answering what I bring to you, how I think you should understand the text, but my job is to help you understand, well, how do you understand a text? How do you begin to think about writing and what can that give to us? And in an age like right now, a lot of things want to tell us that someone else should be thinking for us. Particularly, this is the age of AI problem,
Sure, yeah.
which is so central to being a writing teacher right now. There's so many things that want to say, you know what, we can write that for you. But the writing is about the process. It's about what it does for you. It's about what it does for our students and how they're changed by discovering, oh, let me try that word, or let me try that thought, or, oh, I put this with this, and suddenly I see something different. And so if we think only in terms of something written as a task to complete or as a finished product, well, we miss out on the entire process of being moved and changed by the very art of writing. And that's why we do it. That's why we show up in any sort of English classroom and why we ask students to write essays, why we teach them how to write. It has to do, I don't need to read another, what someone else thinks about, what a 10th grader thinks about Shakespeare. It can be great, it can be interesting, but, just as a professional, it's probably not going to do that much for the field of literary studies. But for that person, for that student, it's going to do something. It's going to help them understand something different about that text or about themselves or about what they're capable of. And that's really so much of what we're kind of trying to aim for.
I love that. Those who've listened to the podcast know that I was not an English teacher. I was a science teacher. So I don't know if I ever really thought about it from an English teacher standpoint of, okay, every year you have to do Romeo and Juliet, for example, right? And in the classroom. And it's new for them every year, right? It's not new for you, but it's new for them. And if you could leverage that sort of thinking about, I'm not doing this for myself, I'm doing this to help my students find something within themselves, help them learn something about themselves through this idea of questioning and inquiry. I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. I think we've already kind of started discussing about this, but what drove you to utilize this method in your classroom? What drove you to say, yeah, inquiry is really the way I want to go?
I think I'd mentioned earlier that part of my training was working in a writing center, and I can start sort of there. What we do in writing centers, and this is, maybe not every single one, but this is pretty broad across how we work in writing centers, is we invite students in, and they come and they sit right next to us, and they bring their piece of writing, and often what we do is either they read it aloud or we read it aloud, and we sit and we stop and we say, here's what I noticed, or what do you notice? They notice something by hearing what they wrote or by experiencing it in a new way. And the point is not to make something, often people have the misconception that we're there to fix the writing.
Yeah.
Fix is a word. Fix, correct. These are words I would like to lose from our vocabulary of thinking about writing. But we sit down together, and through the process of sitting with this piece of writing, we learn something. We see what's on the page in a new way, and we see, oh, this is what I meant, or this is what I was trying to say, or this sounds different from my thoughts, or suddenly it's making me think of this. And that's so much of, I think, what drives me coming back into any classroom I'm in, be it a more literary classroom, a more rhetorical classroom, or a classroom that's more about the teaching of teaching, really. All those classrooms, what I strive for is for us to sit down, side by side, and see, well, what's here? What's the effect of that? And that might be from the piece of writing that we're looking at. It might be looking at a text together and saying, well, what do you notice? What's a question I often ask my students, because anxiety is a large part of the teaching of writing, especially, and I'm sure you feel this, especially to my students who come from the sciences, my science and engineering.
It's not comfortable.
They're like, I did this so I don't have to write. And I often ask them, when did you decide that you're not great at writing? And they'll tell me something like, it's like third grade when they discovered they were good at math, or their handwriting was bad, or something to that effect, right? There's this moment where they're very young, and they decide, in the same way that we'll have a moment often when we're younger than we'd like it to be, where we decide we're not good at art or something like that. Everyone is capable of doing all these things. Talk to a 4-year-old and they will tell you some great stories and they'll draw some great pictures. And they'll understand, they'll just kind of be freer in their thoughts. Well, coming back, a lot of my questions in the classroom are, how do we bring this idea of play back into the ways that we think about text, back into the way that we look at our own writing, so that we can be open to those discoveries and not so worried about doing it wrong. Because it's hard to do writing and thinking wrong, right? There's not a right answer. And so I often, when I'm talking about, let's say, poetry, which a lot of students fear, even teachers of English, I had colleagues when I taught in middle school who would say how scared they were of it. April is the cruelest month. They would be terrified of the poetry unit. And we would talk a lot about, well, can we just start from noticing? Right? There's not a right answer. Yeah. There's also not no answer, which is the other thing people think about poetry or literature or inquiry, that we're just kind of doing, there's, no holds barred, everything. No, it's what's there. What do you notice? What is different? What's weird to you? And then we can say, okay, well, what's doing that? Why? What's its effect? Why is that happening? And we can kind of slowly go together. So that was a kind of long answer to your question, but I think there are so many ways in which I feel like I don't know how to do it any other way. Yeah. Because to me, to write to learn is a phrase that we use a lot in writing studies. And that, I think, is the only way that I understand the process of writing. Because if I wanted you to answer a question in a, true, false sort of way, I'd ask that question. Right. But if I'm asking you to write an essay, I don't want to know what I already think. I want you to be changed and moved by it.
That's interesting. I think, it supersedes any content, but the idea of having a student explaining their thinking, teaching someone else, right, writing about what they know is a way for them to internalize it a little bit more. So noticing your responses about getting students to notice and wonder and think about how their reflection is coming back from the writing or the piece of literary work that they're looking at, they could go a lot of different ways, right? They can go from their own background experiences, they can go from what they're noticing, what they're experiencing now, and that there's an inherent sort of messiness that can come from that. They can go in so many different ways. So I guess the question is, how do you handle a classroom full of students who are all going in their own direction, and you still have a very specific thing that you want them to get out of it? How do you handle the messiness when there is a clear goal that you need them to accomplish?
Well, I think we have to think about what those goals are. And they look different in the English classroom. A lot of our goals are they're not necessarily about content. They're very much about skills. Can you approach a text? Do you know how to analyze? Do you know how to close read? Do you know how to gather evidence and how to use evidence in a meaningful way? Do you know how to listen to other people and even listen to yourself in order to figure out, well, what is the argument that I want to make or the reading that I am finding? And, that argument still has to come from the text itself, right? So can I tie that to textual evidence? Can I, do I know how to make a thesis statement and what that is? So there are these basic skills that I build into the scaffolding of both my instruction and my assignments. So for instance, in my college level classes, we're always working on a piece of writing because writing is really, really hard to teach in theory. I can lecture you all day about paragraph organization. It will be boring and it's not going to really stick unless you can immediately apply it through, right, maybe group practice and independent practice to see, how am I making these decisions? Because we don't write in theory. It's the decisions we make on the page. So we kind of have to sit with that mess while also understanding that, yes, there are really concrete skills that we're teaching, right? Just saying that there's not one, that I don't want you to get a certain reading out of a text, or I want you to discover what you want to discover. I have to give you all these tools. And so we can subdivide and scaffold. So we'll always kind of early in the semester, we'll have a specific moment where we're really thinking about thesis statements, and students bring in a draft of whatever, we've kind of built to this point. They'll bring in a draft of it. Then we'll go through a kind of mini lesson of what are some of the features of college level, especially English major kinds of thesis statements, which look pretty different from the kind of 5-paragraph structure that they're often used to, because it's a different level, right? And that's how we do it. And if we're doing that at an earlier level, it might have different features, but whatever those features are. And then I'll give them sometimes a template to play with. At the college level, we do a lot of although, this, that, because it inherently gives some tension into the kind of argument they're making. There has to be the sentence structure itself has that built in, and that helps them learn that sentence structure, in fact, changes what you think. And so we play with that, and sometimes, I just tell them that I'm mean and I make them write a lot. One of my favorite exercises to do is to make them write 5 versions of their thesis statement in 5 minutes.
Oh.
Sometimes if I'm really on my game, I bring stickers and they can put a sticker next to their favorites. College students still love stickers.
It's amazing, right?
Everyone loves stickers. There's a moment in like 6th, 7th grade where students are scared of anything that makes them feel like little kids. It's the only time they used to reject my SpongeBob Band-Aids. And then the 8th graders would come back and they'd be like, can I have one to just put on my face for no reason? And the 6th graders would be like, they're gonna think I like SpongeBob.
I like SpongeBob.
Right? Who doesn't? But college students, they have to be invited to play.
Yeah.
All of our students, in many ways, they're trying to figure out. They don't know that play is an important part of adulthood, and it's how we learn. So we'll do these kind of 5 thesis statements in 5 minutes, for instance, and the idea is that usually your favorite is somewhere around 3 or 4 in that list. Every now and then it's something you brought in, every now and then it's a different spot, but it's about something that I emphasize to them all the time, which is that different writing choices are different. They're not inherently, we're not interested in better or worse. We're interested in difference. And then you can look and you can say, I think, I like this one, or this works for this reason. But kind of coming back to the overarching question here, it's an example of how we scaffold these skills so that the argument you're making and the process and the pieces that you're talking about, those are going to be individual. But the skill that we're working on together, be it how do you write a thesis, how do you use evidence, how do you close read, these are going to be the moments where we have our mini lesson and our practice, and maybe we look at some examples together. But the product that you're making and the directions it draws you in, that's going to be where so much of the inquiry is happening. But we can't just throw students kind of out there and just say, go write, because they need that scaffolding to understand, okay, well, let me look at this piece with more detail. Let me understand what's happening here, and let me have an opportunity to really focus on this, and then we can build our assignments so that, now we have this foundation, and we can move, and we can add this piece.
Yeah, it's really interesting sort of to compare sort of your answers to the person that I interviewed out of science or the person that I interviewed out of math, right? I mean, the inquiry has always been about skills, right? Anytime we use an inquiry in the classroom, it's about building the skills of asking questions and finding out the answers to them yourself or through that process. And when I ask about scaffolding for some of the others, it's been about, okay, well, we practice skills on a small scale to get an answer, and then we gradually get it bigger and bigger. But what I'm getting from you is a lot of times the scaffolding comes from the iterative nature of drafting, right? Of doing a first draft, second draft, and just coming back to your writing and refining it more and more. Is that true?
I think very much so. And opportunities to practice and to take risks are really vital. So I try to build this into the assignment structure. So I ask for a lot of writing. In most of my classes, I have to break the bad news during, syllabus week that if we're in like a computer lab or if it's a writing specific class, we're probably writing on day 1. And usually I have an assignment due around the weekend of the first week of classes. Something short, but something that lets me, it works as a kind of diagnostic. What do I see? What do my students bring to me? It lets them see my feedback right away, because feedback is just so vital to any of this. It's great for them. They learn a lot out of just the practice, but getting that little bit of feedback and that opportunity for me to say, oh, here's what I see, work on this, right? It's really an individual back and forth and a conversation.
Right.
When I teach my pedagogy students, we talk about how feedback is itself a genre of writing. We don't always think of it that way, but when we're giving students, especially in-text feedback on their writing, but really any feedback, we have to think about, well, what is this? I am writing, from my positionality in the context of this classroom, am writing this piece of writing that is going to be read, hopefully. We can build in ways to make them pay more attention. Revision's a big one, but to our comments. But they're going to read and encounter my feedback, and they're a real audience, right? Like that is a genre. And understanding that I am also engaged in the genre of writing is also a really important thing. So there's kind of a lot that is happening all at the same time, but the practice and the scaffolding and making sure that we're thinking in terms of our rubrics and our assignments, that we're thinking about really the most important concerns. What are the most important things we want to teach? They need to be able to learn to read a text and to analyze it and take something out of it and start to build an argument first before I worry that much about how they organize it. That's going to be the next piece. And much later than that is something like citation, making sure that everything, is neater. We have to be willing to sit with a mess and make sure that we're not stopping ourselves because we're afraid of making a mess. And it's
Right.
it is anxiety inducing especially for a lot of my students who come from fields that are more, this answer is right or this is wrong. They are scared when we have to build trust together.
Sure.
To
Yeah.
say that, no, I really do want you to take risks. I'm going to reward it. And honestly, if you write a paper and by the end of it, you're like, you know what? I no longer agree with myself. I've talked to me that's also good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to penalize you, and I'm going to build my grading so that I'm not going to penalize you for that. I'm going to encourage you to try that, because I'd much rather that than you limit your thinking because you're like, no, it needs to have this exact framework and look exactly this way. And my outline said I'm going to write this, so therefore I'm going to write this.
So when writing is about student reflection and student voice, those discussions, those writing can go in a lot of different ways. So how do you get a student to move past that surface level thinking? If we're thinking about maybe the science or math minded person who doesn't feel comfortable, doing this in the writing, how do you push them a little bit further and be more interpretive and be deeper?
There are a lot of different strategies that we use, right? So a lot of times what we're offering when we're say offering a reading of a text or something like that, those are models. If I'm going to explain, here's one way of looking at Frankenstein or something like that, or I'm going to close read a passage for you, I'm going to do that very briefly, but I'm going to understand it as, here's one model of thinking. And let's think about, how do we put that together? When we come back, I'm constantly having students also have opportunities to do low stakes, small little pieces, and to talk to small groups. So in a lot of my classes, I will build in kind of fixed discussion groups, for instance, where it shifts whose turn it is to bring the passage or bring the question. And then they're going to sit together and they're going to look at it. And we're going to, again, have these opportunities to model in my, the moments of mini lecture. I often do more large class discussion to begin with because I want to model that and have a little bit more feedback, and then set them kind of up together to learn from one another, and then have these opportunities to practice. But the other thing comes back to we need opportunities to hear one another, to have larger models, and we need opportunities for individual feedback, which is hard as a teacher. There are so many things and constraints on our time, and constraints on the number of students we're working with, but we have to build in some way these opportunities to sit with our students and think about, oh, here's what I notice. And maybe this is more, this is more summary based, or this is, which summary we also understand and talk about as it itself is a form of argument. That's why you and I could summarize the same book and we would say it differently. And inherently there is something argumentative about what do we put in, what do we leave out, right? We're changing, we're making decisions, writerly decisions in there. But we have to sit and have these moments to say, okay, we understand this, now what? And I do a lot of close reading, a lot of putting passages on the board, and I read them aloud, and I either stop when I have something to say or when they have something to say, or ask something like, what's the effect of, there's a however here, what's it doing? Or where are we as readers? What's happening? What do you notice? And that question of what do you notice, if you're asked it over and over and over again, at some point you're going to feel less scared of noticing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the repetitive nature of just practicing the skill, right? I mean, you get more comfortable with it. So what is the value of an assignment or a discussion or a writing where a student chooses to maybe go against a common interpretation? If they're putting themselves into the work, then I would imagine that happens somewhat often. What's the value of them arguing, a different side of things?
Well, so we might think about, why is it that we teach literature? And that's a big question. That's a way to get myself in trouble. But there are a lot of reasons for that. To me, I'm not going to teach people Shakespeare, for instance, so that they understand how critics understand Shakespeare, right? I don't need, especially when I'm thinking about the K through 12 classroom, but when I'm thinking about people who are not going into, they're not getting PhDs, I am not interested in them being able to parrot back, this is the critical conversation about it. Now, we might look at readings and again say how they're built, and it's good to know these are some common interpretations of, the way these symbols are working, because that tells us it's a model. It's a model for how we understand. But what is the skill that I want my students to take away? It is the skill of being able to open a text and find something to think about there. It's a skill of being able to talk to other people or to look at conversations that are happening in the world and say, I notice this pattern. I notice this piece of evidence, and this is happening, and let me think and make those connections. And it's also, the joy that is returning to art. There's a reason why no matter what is happening in the world, people create art. And every time I've had a challenging moment, a moment of grief, a moment of sadness or just anxiety, whatever is happening in my life, I have found myself drawn to works of art, to pieces of writing that aren't necessarily about whatever it is, but that help me recognize the shared situation of human emotions, right? That we're all together, and that, grief is something that's hard for everyone. So what I want my students to do at the end of the day, when they leave my classroom, when they leave high school, when they leave college, I want them to continue to read. I want them to respect their own ability to think, and I want them to be able to use evidence, not just, when we talk about their kind of individual voices, that doesn't mean anything goes. That means these are the pieces of this text that I'm drawing together, and this is how I understand those things. But I want to create people who are lifelong learners and who are lifelong readers and who understand that they have something to say, but also that they have something to say through the process of listening, both literally and metaphorically, to other people, to texts, and to themselves.
I love it. So we're running out of time here, and this is a great conversation, and I wish we could spend 30 more minutes on it. But if listeners are wanting to know a little bit more about inquiry in the English classroom, either your journey or resources out there, where could they go to find out more information?
That's a good question that I don't know that I have a great answer for. If you can find me on A&M's English website, and the larger conversation that is writing studies, and especially things like writing to learn, there's a lot out there about these ideas of writing as thinking and process-based learning. The Writing Center is also a great resource to go to have this experience that I'm talking about of sitting with someone and really thinking about your own writing. And I'll say this to those of you who are in school and sometimes might be feeling nervous about your own experience with writing. Go to your own experience. Sit and be uncomfortable with the experience of writing and let yourself have that. Take some risks. And I think through that process, too, you'll learn a lot and be able to bring it to your students, your future students. So don't be scared of the page because it has a lot to teach you as well.
I love it. And that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Dr. DiCaglio, for being with us today in the studio. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is Aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.